23-year-old Mackenzie Lewick was originally from the city of El Segundo in California and was the second of her parents' 4 children and their only daughter. Sports were her big passion. Long bike rides down the beach, competing on the swim team, playing water polo, and she was a regular face in the crowds at her team's football games. When it came time for her university decisions, California-loving Mackenzie wanted to see more and feel an independence she didn't think she'd get from staying close to home. She settled on a place almost 700 miles away, the University of Utah, to major in kinesiology and pre-nursing and minor in health. She was accepted into Alpha Chi Omega, which quickly consumed much of what little free time she had. Members had to maintain a 2.5 GPA and participate in philanthropic endeavors as well. That, alongside the 2 jobs Mackenzie worked, meant she was always busy, and now in her 3rd year she decided to drop some classes and be a part-time senior. She lived off campus in a little townhouse with her pets, her hedgehogs, guinea pigs, and cat Nova. Her friends said she didn't do anything by halves and could always see the funny side of things, even throwing a birthday party for her cat Nova, with champagne for her friends and a cake made of cat food. She made everyone wear party hats and watch as she unwrapped presents for her. Kennedy was one of Mackenzie's sorority sisters and described her as a nurturer and very loyal. She was always smiling, so much so that when she had braces, she cut into her lips because she smiled and laughed so much. Kennedy said she was one of those people always cooking for you. She wants to make sure you're getting fed. She wants to make sure if you need a drink that you have a drink. It just made her happy to look after people. As the summer of 2019 started to creep in, the already stretched thin Mackenzie was faced with a new, tough challenge. She lost someone especially close to her, her grandmother. In mid-June, she flew out to Los Angeles for her funeral, and on June 17th at 1 a.m., she landed back at Salt Lake City International Airport. At 2 a.m., she sent her mom a text saying, "Landed? Love you, mama." And just a few minutes later, she was looking for a ride, either using Uber or Lyft. When her mom Diana replied to her, she noticed that the usually blue iPhone message had been delivered as green. Perhaps her phone had died or she was struggling for signal in the busy airport. But her daughter never got back to her. Over the next few hours and into the following day, as more people reached out with condolences and supportive messages, they too were met with silence. However, it didn't seem that odd that she wasn't replying. She did have other things to think about, of course, and probably wanted space. But her old school friend Kennedy said that despite this, something about her friend's lack of response was bothering her. Mackenzie wasn't opening up her Snapchats, there was nothing on social media, and even with the things going on, she felt sure that her friend would have posted something somewhere or replied to at least one text, especially as she knew people would be worrying about her. On June 20th, Mackenzie's dad Greg requested a welfare check. Authorities went to her house and found her car parked outside. There was no answer and they couldn't see anything through the windows. They started making calls to her friends, her job, and her university. She had now missed a very important exam, shifts at work, and a wedding back in California. A week would soon have passed since Mackenzie landed, with still nothing from her. A proper search finally got underway. Police first went to the airport where they found her on the cameras. She had got off the plane, was by herself as she collected her bags, and did not stop to talk to anyone, and no one seemed to be following her. About 40 minutes after she landed, Mackenzie got a ride via Lyft to Hatch Park. This was about 9 miles from her townhouse. The Lyft driver had now been found and he said he did indeed drop her at the park safe and well. She said she was meeting someone. He did think it was a strange place to be asked to go, but nothing really stood out to him about her demeanor and she didn't seem upset or nervous. Mackenzie had even made a point of admitting that it was an odd place to be dropped off, but she didn't elaborate and carried on texting someone. When he pulled up, he had spotted a car already parked, and as he was helping her with her bags, out of the corner of his eye, he noticed someone get out of the car. But it was so dark and far away he couldn't say anything about this person. It was just a dark, blurry outline. As he got back into his vehicle, he heard voices and said it seemed as if whoever this person was knew Mackenzie. He couldn't remember any words, but there were no raised voices and it seemed that this person was there to pick her up. He drove off and carried on with his pickups. What he said checked out, all confirmed by his phone data, and police were satisfied. He had nothing to do with her being missing. Her friends were concerned that the police were still saying they had no reason to suspect foul play. Huge groups of volunteers were now handing out flyers to every single car that went past, talked to every news outlet, and every single day they were out. Police finally got a big tip-off from a former Salt Lake City police officer turned private investigator, Rob Joseph. He had seen the 23-year-old's picture and suddenly remembered he had actually had an encounter with her a few weeks before she vanished. Rob and his friend had randomly bumped into Mackenzie in a bar. He described her as being chatty and friendly, and they spoke for about an hour over some drinks. As they talked, Rob said that Mackenzie had told them she had recently joined a dating site called Seeking Arrangement. This site, with almost 50 million users worldwide, advertises itself as the largest luxury dating site for the beautiful, wealthy, and successful, billing itself at the time as a platform for so-called sugar daddies to meet so-called sugar babies. Rob said she didn't go into detail about what she was looking for, but she had had 2 pretty serious relationships prior to this and was now single and just living her life. This was a pretty big lead and a huge surprise for a lot of people. They had no idea Mackenzie was on this site, and it seemed that she had been keeping a lot about her life very secret. They felt sure that the person she had met in the park was likely someone linked to Seeking Arrangement. Rob Joseph found Mackenzie's profile, and her last activity on the site was June 16th, a mere matter of hours before she went missing. A look into her finances showed them that the plane tickets had been paid for by men she had met on the site, and there was a random bank account where $300 had been deposited by someone else too. Mackenzie's dad Greg told police that after she went missing, he found a separate bank account in her name, something they were all totally unaware of. Using these profiles, they began jumping through social media person to person, page to page. Mackenzie had very recently followed a page on Instagram called Fatherless, and it was via this and phone records from her network provider that they found a number she had been texting. The phone was linked to a Salt Lake City home, which was owned by 31-year-old Ayula Ajayi, known as AJ. He was recently divorced, lived close to Hatch Park, and according to his profiles, worked as a support analyst for Dell and was a part-time model. From the outset, everything seemed almost too normal. AJ had no criminal history that they could see, shared a home with a couple of people renting his basement, which was an Airbnb, and he spent most of his time working. But some very disturbing things were about to come out about him, and police soon felt certain this was the person behind whatever had happened to Mackenzie Lewick. AJ had attended Utah State University on a student visa, but only sporadically went to his classes. After this, he got a green card so he could stay living and working in Utah, and alongside his day job he had also written a novel, the plot of which was a young man who witnesses 2 murders and must decide if he wants to pursue a life of crime. He talked about burning bodies, and in his author profile he said, survived a tyrannical dictatorship, escaped a real-life crime, traveled internationally. His now ex-wife lived apart from him and was staying in Dallas. She said she had stopped talking to him completely because she was so terrified of him. He would often threaten to have someone kidnap her and kill her, and she had had to change her number, block him on everything, and eventually divorce him in January 2019. He had been investigated for rape in 2014 and assaulting a woman in 2018, but no charges were ever filed. AJ told police that he had never spoken to Mackenzie and had no idea who she was. When asked why his number would be linked to her, he told officers that the text may have been sent by someone staying at his house. A local contractor named Brian told detectives that AJ had messaged him about building a hidden, soundproof room with a thumbprint lock behind a secret door in his house. AJ told him money was no object, but he needed a quick turnaround. He wanted to get it all finished before his girlfriend came into town. He asked why, and AJ said he wanted a place to hide his alcohol as his girlfriend was Mormon and didn't know he drank. Although Mackenzie was brought up in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, she openly didn't practice it. Who he was referring to remained unknown. Brian said, the reasons he was giving me just didn't add up to me, and I had a gut feeling and I just had to walk away. He was only inside the house 30 minutes. When me and my nephew left, we got in the truck, and I looked at him and I was like, that was weird, right? And he's like, yeah, that was hella weird. We're not doing this job, right? And I was like, hell no, we're not. The plan never went ahead, but AJ continued to message him about it. AJ then voluntarily walked into the police station with a slightly different story. He admitted that he and Mackenzie had actually talked briefly after meeting on Seeking Arrangement, although she had stopped talking to him soon after he made contact. But he had finally admitted to communicating with her, and this was enough to issue a search warrant at his Fair Park home. They noted that the mattress was missing. His house smelled like bleach, and there were multiple cameras in every room. He rented out some of his basement area to a couple of people, and they were asked to leave the property while everything was going on. As police searched more, AJ stood outside watching on. He soon asked if he could go somewhere else, as he didn't want people staring at him. As he walked off down the street, one of his neighbors told officers that they had smelled something horrible around the time Mackenzie vanished, and had looked outside to see him pouring gasoline everywhere. They showed police where they had seen it, They found the remnants of a fire and a huge, freshly dug hole. A cadaver dog reacted quickly, ran straight to the patch of dirt, and lay down on it. They also found a bone, which they quickly determined to be human, and what looked like part of a scalp with hair still attached. A charred iPhone and some burned clothes lay around too. They seized AJ's devices, which later turned out to be full of child abuse material, children as young as 4 years old. AJ was found in a nearby park, detained, and taken back to the station for another interview. What they found was damning, but there were no test results yet. Over the following couple of days, phone records put both Mackenzie and AJ together at Hatch Park within less than 1 minute of each other. His car was also seen pulling into the park at 2:48 a.m. 10 minutes later. Her last text to him was sent, and her phone was then turned off at 2:59 a.m., never to be turned back on. AJ's phone put him at his home at 3:07 a.m. AJ said to police that they were wasting time focusing on him, and they would soon realize it was a dead end. They were closing in though, and the once so confident AJ was starting to seem less so. Finally, his phone gave them a key location. A day after Mackenzie got into his car, he had driven to an area in Logan Canyon 85 miles away from his house. This finally gave them a place to look for Mackenzie, but the area was massive and it would be a tough task. To their relief, they did not have to look far. In part of the river, they found Mackenzie's burned purse, bag, ID cards, and some more clothing. The items found in his home were all a match to Mackenzie. Near to where her ID was found, Mackenzie's remains were finally discovered in a shallow grave in a wooded area. It was clear that her arms had been bound behind her back by a zip tie, and some rope was found next to her too. She had a hole in her skull and part of her scalp was missing, which had been found in his home, and the autopsy confirmed she had died from blunt force trauma. Police arrested 31-year-old Ayoola Ajayi on suspicion of the kidnapping and murder of Mackenzie Lueck. His first hearing lasted only 2 minutes and he did not enter a plea. But the prosecution had a vast amount of evidence against him, and his ex-wife said she was so disgusted and upset at what he had done. She was more than willing to testify against him in court. Upon hearing that the death penalty was on the table, AJ accepted a plea deal, pleading guilty to aggravated murder and desecration of a human body. In exchange for his guilty plea, some other charges were dismissed. These included aggravated kidnapping and obstructing justice. The plea bargain also resolved other charges he was facing in 2 unrelated cases. He admitted to forcible sexual abuse, assaulting a woman in March 2018, and this was now dropped. And given what they had found on his devices, he had been charged with 19 felony counts of sexual exploitation of a minor. These charges too were dropped. AJ admitted to the court that he had planned on killing Mackenzie before he even met with her that morning. Before he left his house, he turned off all of his security cameras, and once he and Mackenzie arrived back at his home, he tied her hands behind her back and started strangling her. Mackenzie put up a fight and begged him to stop, but he threw her onto her stomach and used a belt to carry on choking her. She had died of blunt force trauma to the head, but he did not go into detail about this. He then burned her body and buried her in his backyard before digging her back up and moving her out to the canyon. AJ addressed Greg and Diana Lueck in court. "I'm sorry for what I did. I deserve what I'm going to get. I know this won't bring her back." To this day, the prosecution and police are still confused and in the dark as to why he did what he did. The district attorney said, "Most homicides we deal with have clearly identifiable motives: financial gain, revenge, perceived wrongs. But that doesn't exist in this case. Without having met her in person before, he already decided to murder her." The only conclusion that evidence suggests is that Ayoola Ajayi simply wanted to know what it felt like to kill. This was murder for murder's sake. One of Mackenzie's friends, Katie, added, "No person, regardless of their gender or dating life, deserves to die. Mackenzie is not responsible for the death. There's only one person responsible for that, and we're here to hold him responsible." If Kenzie knew what was going to happen, she would not have met with that individual at the park. Her death is not her fault, and for people to say things other than that is hurtful. It's hurtful to other victims out there. It just doesn't make sense. Her friends and family set up a non-profit organization called Mackenzie's Voice. Her friend Ashley said, "We learned that there's not really a handbook or manual or toolkit for friends or family members when their friend goes missing." Mackenzie's mom said that her daughter was a real spitfire, a loyal friend to the end. Her friends carry on throwing birthday parties for Nova, always remembering to laugh about the good times and fun memories they had together. Ashley added, "This person took away our friend, but he will not take away our strength. We will continue to advocate for victims of violence in our community, and will continue to use Mackenzie's voice for good. February 1st, 2004. It had been a busy day in the United States. The Super Bowl had had its most watched game ever, with nearly 90 million people tuning in to see the New England Patriots beat the Carolina Panthers in a 32-29 victory. With a halftime show starring Justin Timberlake and Janet Jackson, the event would become one of the most talked about pop culture moments of the 2000s. For many football fans, the celebrations were just beginning. But in Sarasota, Florida, it was a very different story. A massive search was underway for a missing 11-year-old girl who had vanished without a trace. The truth was about to come out. A truth so disturbing it would leave a family, a community, a police force, and a country completely devastated. Carly Jane Brusher was born on the 16th of March, 1992 in Long Island to parents Joe and Susan. They were divorced the following year, and Carly moved to Sarasota, Florida with her mother. But she would see her family in Long Island during the winter and summer breaks, especially enjoying the Christmas period there. Susan would later remarry and welcome a son with her husband Stephen. Carly was described as energetic. Her teacher said she was lovely and delightful, and her principal called her a shining light. She loved her cat Charlie, was obsessed with Jennifer Lopez, enjoyed going to the mall and hanging out with her friends. She always greeted those at McIntosh Middle School, where she was in the 6th grade, with a big hug and a warm smile. She sang in the chorus and enjoyed playing sports. Quite simply, she was someone who loved life. February 1st, 2004. Carly had spent the previous day with her friend, and the pair had had a sleepover. At around 6:15 p.m. she set off back to her house just 1 mile away, as she was due to watch the Super Bowl with her family. Her friend's mother decided to call Susan to check if it was okay for Carly to be walking home alone. Susan said she didn't want her daughter walking by the Bee Ridge Road as it could be busy, and she hadn't given Carly permission to walk alone. She spoke to her husband Stephen, and he drove off to pick her up. The streets were somewhat quieter, as most families were gathered around the television for the Super Bowl. But as Stephen drove around the streets, panic was beginning to set in. He couldn't see Carly anywhere. She had gone without a trace. Just 1 hour later, 911 was called, and Carly Brusher was reported as missing. The police were dispatched and soon at Carly's house. They spoke to all of Carly's friends to see if they had seen or heard from her, and knocked on neighbors' doors in the hopes that someone had information for them. They spoke to the friend whose house she had stayed at and her friend's mother, and Carly was described as being a bit upset as her mother and stepdad had been arguing. She had wanted to leave early and go home to spend time with Susan. As news began to spread, the searches got bigger, and the police carried on with them until 3 o'clock in the morning. But there was still no sign of Carly. It had soon been 12 hours since she had last been seen. As her classmates arrived at school, they were all hoping to see her there, but she didn't turn up. After she failed to make it to school, the police decided to bring in bloodhounds to see if they could trace her scent using one of her pillowcases. Ruby the bloodhound tracked her scent to behind Evie's car wash at 4715 Bee Ridge Road. It then suddenly stopped. The police quickly sealed off the area and spoke with the owner of the car wash, Mike Evenhoff, who told them there were surveillance cameras operated by a motion sensor. Footage from one camera showed the busy main road, but an empty parking lot. Another camera from a different angle also showed them nothing. They then checked the camera at the back of the car wash. It was a camera that was triggered by movement, and as they pressed play, it showed a recording taken from 6:21 p.m. on the evening of Carly's disappearance. It showed a young girl in a red shirt and blue jeans with a pink backpack. This was what Carly was wearing on the day she had last been seen. Then suddenly another person came into view. A man. The man in the video was approximately 5'8", with dark hair and tattoos on his arm. He was wearing a mechanic's top with a name tag that was too blurry to be made out. He stopped in front of her, and the pair spoke for a few seconds. He then grabbed her arm and led her away. Even though the footage was just a few seconds long, it painted a terrifying picture, and it was clear to all of the officers that Carly was in grave danger. Her stepfather Stephen was asked to go down to the station to talk to the police. He said he knew that something was wrong because Carly just did not behave this way. She was always sure to call and keep her parents in the loop as to where she was and what she was doing. Based on Stephen's phone records, he was immediately ruled out. But he did say something interesting. He said as he was driving down Bee Ridge Road looking for Carly, he had spotted a red truck that was also driving up and down too. A truck that had pulled into the car wash. He said that when he went to her friend's house, the same house that Carly had set off from, a red truck was parked outside. He was sure it was the same one he had seen earlier. The man in the footage was wearing a mechanic's uniform, something often worn by tow truck drivers. The owner of the truck, a man called Ron, lived at Carly's friend's house, and he had been there the night before. They immediately brought him in for questioning. They showed him a photograph of Carly with the man in the car wash. They spoke to his boss, and they were able to verify that Ron had been working, and his time cards also backed this up. A search was carried out of his truck, but nothing was found. Ron was ruled out. But this meant they still didn't know who the man in the footage was or where he had taken Carly. They also showed the footage to Susan, but she too had no idea of who he was. For the community, this was alarming, as Joe said. The police decided to recheck the footage to see if it could give them any more clues as to who this man was. And when they rewound the footage further, they saw a pale yellow 1992 Buick Century station wagon arriving in the parking lot just 3 minutes before Carly was kidnapped. The Buick then drove down Bee Ridge Road and braked just outside of the car wash to turn in. This finally gave them another lead. The searches carried on, and many people came out to look for her. Missing persons posters were stapled up and handed out. The community were determined to leave no stone unturned. The mayor called Carly Sarasota's child. They were not going to rest until she was found. Her mother Susan appeared at a press conference. "I want to address my Carly. I love you. I have this phone on at all times. I'm begging and pleading. Please help me bring my daughter home." Her father added, "Carly, if you can hear this, your mom's at home waiting for you." February 3rd, 2004. It had now been 2 days since Carly's abduction. A woman was watching the news and saw the footage from the car wash. She got her husband to also watch it, and they were in agreement. They knew the man. He was a former business associate. She said, "I worked with him at the shop, so I knew what he looked like. The sneakers, the way his hair was cut, the way he walked. And then when I watched him reach for the girl, I've seen him pick tools up like that, you know? I knew it was him." Her husband called the police and provided the man's name and address to Detective Vincent Reaver. Detective Reaver and another officer headed over to the address provided in an unmarked car and met 2 more police officers. A neighbor told them that someone was definitely home. So the officers knocked on the front door and waited. There was no response. One of the officers called a supervisor for advice, and they discovered that the man in question was actually on probation. He had had 2 previous parole violations but had not been remanded. They got in touch with his probation officer and asked her to come down to the house. Around 45 minutes went by and a woman arrived at the property. She was the man in question's sister. She agreed to get him and bring him out. Then, standing in front of them, there he was. Joseph Peter Smith, 37 years old. Father of 3, originally from Brooklyn. Joseph Smith had a long list of previous criminal convictions and was currently unemployed. He had at least 13 prior arrests in the state dating back to 1993. For possession of heroin and prescription drug fraud, he spent 17 months in custody. Just 8 days after his release, he was arrested again for possession of cocaine and was put on probation for 3 years. He had also been arrested, charged and later acquitted for a charge of kidnapping and false imprisonment. He had very recently violated the terms of his probation but was released. The woman who had seen him on the news was not the first person to give the detectives this name. Of the over 800 tips they had received since releasing the footage of Carly's abduction, several other people had called in to say that they believed that this man was Joseph Smith. He drove a brown Lincoln, not a Buick station wagon that had been seen driving down Bee Ridge Road and braking just outside of the car wash to turn in. While officers tried to trace the owner of the Buick, 2 detectives spoke to Joseph Smith. The officers asked him about what he had been doing on the day Carly had been abducted, asking if he had been at the car wash. He said he hadn't been. One of the officers then asked if they could look more closely at his tattoos, and he asked them why they were even there and why they were talking to him. He was told they were looking at a kidnapping. He said he didn't know what they were talking about. They then showed him a photograph of the surveillance footage. "That looks like me, but it's not me," he said. Joseph agreed to let the officers search his vehicle and the room he rented. He didn't appear nervous and was cooperative with the detectives. When a search of his room was conducted, they found nothing that linked him to Carly. But they did find a mechanic's uniform with a name tag on the front. A search of his car was also conducted and drug paraphernalia was found. So he was arrested for violating the terms of his parole and possession of drug paraphernalia. As his brown Lincoln was being searched, one of the owners of the home he was renting a room in, a woman called Naomi, arrived at the property, driving a yellow Buick station wagon. The officers asked her if she knew anything about Joseph's whereabouts on the day Carly had last been seen. She explained that at around 6:30 Joseph had been on the phone with his estranged wife. This meant he now had an alibi. They were now back at square one and time was running out to find Carly. But just a few hours later, more information would be brought to light. Naomi's husband, Jeff, arrived at the station. He was driving the Buick station wagon. He said that his wife had not recalled it correctly and had got the times wrong. Jeff knew that something had happened in the vehicle as things had been moved around, and the back seat had been put down. Jeff gave the Sarasota County Sheriff's Office the Buick for them to carry out testing and examinations. With Jeff's new information, Joe's whereabouts suddenly could not be accounted for, and they now knew he was driving the station wagon at the time. Joseph was read his Miranda rights and he asked for an attorney. On the evening of the 4th of February, Joseph's brother John arrived at the police department and was spoken to by the FBI. He said that he and Joseph were not on good terms, and that on the evening of the 1st of February, the day Carly was kidnapped, he had received a call from Joseph at around 8 p.m. John didn't speak to him. The following day, John and his girlfriend were watching television, and then on the news, he saw the footage of Carly's abduction. The face, the hair, the mechanic's uniform. He recognized the man straight away. His girlfriend did too. She noticed particularly the way he walked. Since having surgery on his back, Joseph's walk had changed. Later that night, at around 11 p.m., Joseph had appeared at John's house, seemingly under the influence of some sort of substance. John allegedly refused to let his brother come inside, as he had previously ogled his girlfriend's teen daughter on various occasions. Although Joseph was in his mechanic's uniform as per usual, he wasn't wearing his usual tennis shoes. He was wearing boots, something he never wore. All Joseph would say was, "You want to talk to me about something?" John told him no and shut the door on him. When Joseph arrived at work the next day, he was reportedly acting strangely, repeatedly washing his hands even though they were clean. He also told his boss that he might need to go out of state suddenly and at any time. John told the officers, "Don't have any concrete evidence. It's just, it looks like him, it walks like him. The more I look at that video, the more I look at him. It's just, well, total resemblance if it's not him." They needed Joseph to confess if they wanted any chance of finding Carly. John said that if he was responsible, he would never admit to it. He will die with that secret. If it's him, you won't get it out of him, he told the FBI. To try and gather more evidence, it was announced that the detectives were seeking the help of NASA, who could enhance the image from behind the car wash and see if they could determine what the name tag said. They were able to, said Joe. The arrest report also said that he had maneuvered the Buick in a premeditated manner to conceal his actions, where he was able to approach Carly. The evidence was stacking up, but soon the case would take another turn. The 5th of February 2004, Joseph spoke to his brother and mother. After an hour and a half, John came out and said Joseph came close, but he didn't say anything. Neither John nor his mother were debriefed by officers, and no surveillance was put on them after exiting the station. That evening, John called the FBI. "I guess you heard. What do you want me to do?" The FBI were confused. What on earth was he talking about? John thought his phone had been tapped. It hadn't been. It then clicked. Joseph had obviously called his brother and told him something about Carly. And John, believing his phone had been tapped, was now calling to give them the information. 3 officers, including 2 FBI officers, went straight to John's property, and there the truth would come out. John gave them directions to where she was. 6221 Proctor Road, near I-75. At 1 a.m., in some thick underbrush in a field behind the Central Church of Christ, Carly's body was found. She was naked from the waist down apart from a sock on her right foot. There was a deep ligature wound to her neck. The FBI officers took John back to the police department to talk to him again. He admitted that when he came out of the interview room and said that Joseph hadn't said anything, he was lying. Joseph had actually said, "I'm sorry I did this to you." Their mother then left the room and Joseph carried on talking. He said that he had taken what he thought was cocaine on the day of her abduction and everything that followed was a blur. John said it felt like he was afraid to say, "You know, she's dead." So I just said, "Okay, Joe, she's dead. Fine. Where is she? Where is she? We've got to find her. Where is she?" After they left the station, John and his mother had gone to the church to look, but had not found anything. Joseph then told them she was in a field behind the church. John told the agents he hadn't said this before because he didn't believe what Joseph had said and he hadn't actually confessed to killing Carly. John said he had gone as he was curious to see if anything he said was accurate. He said if he were to find Carly alive, his plan was to free her, give her money, take a photograph to sell to the media, and then use that money to hire a good lawyer for Joseph. Joseph would eventually confess to sexually assaulting her in the vehicle. He then admitted he had violently raped her. A storm was rolling in, so the decision was made to leave her body in situ overnight and move her in the morning. To stop her body from being photographed from above, the police department contacted the White House, who granted a special no-fly zone for the area. Her body was later examined by the Sarasota medical examiner, who determined that she had been dragged into the field and strangled from behind, and ligature marks on her wrists indicated she had been bound. Joseph's DNA was found in semen on her shirt, and it was later reported that the chance of having a DNA profile of a Caucasian man being selected at random that matched the sample was 1 in 32 quintillion. The evidence did not stop there. 2 of her hairs were found in the Buick, and there were 7 fibers found in the Buick that matched Carly's red shirt. Joseph had dumped her clothes and pink backpack in different bins in a bid to cover his tracks. It was Sheriff Bill Borkwell that was given the task every officer dreads. He had to tell Susan. He headed over to her house and broke the news. Susan screamed, "He killed my daughter, he murdered my daughter, he murdered my baby." Sheriff Bill Borkwell then had to tell the public. With his voice breaking as he spoke, said, "Friends, family, and the local community who had searched to try and find her gathered at the church to lay flowers and pay their respects." McIntosh Middle School announced that following the news of her body being found, they were going to open up to the community and offer grief counseling for those affected. The impact of the crime was so enormous, parents were too frightened to even let their daughters walk to the mailbox. The community held a vigil outside her house, showing Carly and her family just how much they were loved and supported. "We love you, Carly" was written on banners and posters. Her father, Joe, offered his thanks to all of those who have been involved. "I just want to thank all of the people behind me in their efforts to find my daughter in the community that was so involved. I just want to thank everybody for all they've done." On the 9th of February, Joseph spoke to his mother, and the conversation went as follows. "Oh, Joe, the best thing you can do is try to explain it was an accident." "But it was an accident, Mom." "I know that, Joe. You don't think I would do that on purpose, Mom?" No, I don't. I don't think so at all, Joe. Not at all. I know you better than that. But everyone is up in arms, the community, the press, the governor, the mayor. You just don't know, Joe." At a memorial service for Carly held on the 10th of February, many people arrived, including Sheriff Bill Borkwell. For everybody, this was the devastating outcome that they had hoped and prayed would not happen. On the February 20th, 2004, Joseph Peter Smith was charged with kidnapping, 1 count of sexual battery, and he was also indicted on a count of first-degree murder. As this was Florida, he could face a death sentence. Captain Jeff Bell said, as he sat in custody awaiting trial, a letter from Joseph to his brother was intercepted. It had been written in code which was later broken. The letter said, "I wish I had something juicy to say. Oh, okay, the backpack and clothes went in 4 different dumpsters. I left it out in the open. I dragged the body to where it was found. Destroy this after deciphering it and shut up." Before the trial could start, Carly's grandmother passed away, with some saying she had died of a broken heart. Her grandfather left the United States and moved to Europe, where he too would later pass away. Carly's uncle would drive his truck into a tree and die as a result of his injuries. It was reported that some had said he had done this with the intention of taking his own life. A month before the trial was due to begin, Joseph's lawyer tried to have the car wash video thrown out and the confession he allegedly gave his brother in prison. The lawyer argued that the prosecution could not prove that the digital images and the time and date stamps on the video were authentic and correct, so therefore should not be used. He also argued that when the FBI got his brother to talk to him when he had already exercised his right to remain silent and asked for an attorney, this led to him being illegally interrogated. An FBI agent said that it was John who had wanted to talk to his brother to see if he would answer any questions, and only did so after the authorities were approved for the visit by Joseph's lawyers. It was now time for Joseph Smith to go on trial. The evidence was strong. The footage from the car wash, the evidence from the Buick, the fact he was driving the Buick at the time, the DNA found on her clothes, and him being able to tell them where her body was. It was a difficult and confronting trial without question. For those who had held out hope, searched for her and been there for her loved ones, it was extremely tough to sit through the details of what had happened to her. One of the people to testify was John, Joseph's brother. But this was not without its problems. Prosecutor Deborah Reaver asked Judge Andrew Owens to declare John as an adverse witness, also known as a hostile witness. At this point, John was facing charges for drug possession and armed robbery. It was reported that John had admitted that during his testimony, he was actually high on crack cocaine. After all of the evidence had been presented to the jury, they soon came back with a verdict. Just a few weeks later, on the 1st of December, a jury voted 10-2 that Joseph Smith should be executed by lethal injection. Joseph asked the judge to spare him for the sake of his family. However, on the 15th of March the following year, the judge officially sentenced Joseph Smith to death for his crimes. Carly endured unspeakable trauma, which began at the time of her kidnapping. The image of the defendant taking her arm and leading her away no doubt will forever be etched in our minds. At 11 years of age, there is no doubt she was aware of her dire predicament and that she had little or no hope of survival. Her death was conscienceless and pitiless, calculated and premeditated. Joseph Smith, based on your actions you have forfeited your right to live freely among us. May God have mercy on your soul. After the death penalty was reached by the jury, Joseph offered a statement that said in part, "I want you to know that I take full responsibility for the crimes. I don't know how this all happened. I was very angry at myself and very high. I knew that getting high was wrong, but I could not stop. I'm not trying to make excuses for what happened, but I really don't remember much about anything on that day." Following his death sentence, Carly's stepfather Stephen said afterwards, Carly's mother was not in court for the sentencing as she was being held in prison on prostitution and drugs charges. She said that she had turned to drugs to numb the agony of losing Carly. After being sent to death row, he would launch several appeals against his sentence. None of his appeals had so far been successful, but everything would soon change. Joe was very critical of the justice system. "I feel so let down by the system because Joseph Smith was on parole before he got to my daughter, and he was supposed to go back to jail for 5 years if he violated. He did violate. He was passed out with a bag of cocaine in a parking lot. Instead of them giving him the consequence that they said they would, they gave him drug offender probation, which is just semantics, and that's why my daughter's not here today. Then they dragged this thing on from 2005 to 2021 and still going, and it's not even done yet. So I have a lot of venom and disdain for the criminal justice system." After browsing the internet, Joe realized that he wasn't the only parent grieving a child who had been allegedly killed by someone on parole or probation. He said he realized this was actually a nationwide problem. Joe contacted the representative Catherine Harris and asked her to do something so that Carly's death would not be in vain and no more parents would have to go through something similar. Catherine Harris later introduced legislation named Carly's Law. She said at a press conference, "We must act now to protect our children from the criminal repeat offenders, who would use society's second chance to commit more acts of violence." Representative Nick Lamson from Texas was a co-sponsor for the bill and said, "While we cannot prevent these events, we are obliged to respond and to help protect our communities. The law would take federal felons back into custody if they were to commit another felony offense, an offense intending to result in sexual contact with someone under the age of 16 or a crime of violence. It was also going to add a year-long extension to the Amber Alert grants, which helps issue alerts about abducted and at-risk children. Due to the cost that the new bill would likely incur, it was met with some pushback, with the state's top prison official saying it would cost nearly $1 billion to put those that had criminal records like Joseph Smith back in custody. Joe said in response to this, "Find it very offensive that they say it costs too much money. No one has the right to put a price on my daughter's head or any other child's." Carly's Law initially didn't pass due to there not being enough time, but Representative Harris said she was going to reintroduce it and expand its scope. The meat of this is still going to be the meat of Carly's Law, but the expansion would be to make sure we are closing other gaps on the exploitation of children. Is nothing more traumatic than a child being exploited or murdered. Everyone suffered greatly when Carly's death occurred, so we just want to make certain that scenario won't happen again. Despite this, Carly's Law was not reintroduced. Bradenton Police Department Assistant Chief Paul McQuaid later confirmed that Joseph Smith was also now a suspect in another murder, the murder of 25-year-old Tara Riley. He added he intended to have officers talk to him about it while he was on death row. In March 2000, Tara Riley's naked body was found in a retention pond behind a Walmart in Florida. Tips had come in, but there was nothing concrete. She had been seen arguing in the parking lot with someone, and 2 years after her murder, the police did question someone that matched the description, but there was not enough evidence to file charges. Before long, her case would go cold and her files would gather dust, any hope of catching her killer fading more and more as the years passed. 6 years later, though, in a recorded phone call, her name would resurface. As Joseph sat in prison, he had a call with his brother and mother. They were asking him a series of questions. One of them was, did they ask about Tara? Joseph's brother John actually knew Tara Riley. The two had worked together. He said that just before her death, she had turned Joseph down. And this humiliation, he believed, was the motivation for killing her. John said, "I'm glad that story put a kick in the authorities' butts to do something about Tara. She was a sweet girl. She had a long life ahead of her. Way too early to depart this earth. I hope they solve this murder before my brother dies." He added that he believed his brother was responsible for her murder. 17 years after Carly's abduction and murder, there was a breaking news announcement. 55-year-old Joseph Smith had died at the Union Correctional Institution on the 26th of July 2021. His cause of death was not immediately announced, but it was later reported that he had died as the result of liver cancer. But other sources said it was after contracting hepatitis C. The Florida State Attorney's Office said in a statement, "While nothing can bring back Carly, we are grateful that her family, her friends, and the entire Sarasota community will finally have closure and will not have to endure any further court proceedings to bring him to justice." Carly's father said he felt wonderful when he heard that Joseph had died. "It's long overdue. The inept and corrupt criminal justice system could not get it done, so the natural order of things finally took care of it," he said. Joseph Smith was never charged in connection with Tara Riley's murder, and her case remains unsolved. The truth about his potential involvement with other crimes, including hers, will now likely never be known. John said he wished his brother had confessed. "He never truly confessed, I don't think, about Carly, and he definitely didn't confess about Tara. He died a coward, that's all." The impact of the murder of Carly Brucher was far-reaching and long-lasting. For her devastated mother Susan, her life was never the same. Carly Brucher was just 11 years old. She had so much to do and so much to see. A life of endless promise clearly lay ahead of her. She was someone who made people feel loved, always being sure to greet her friends with a big hug and a friendly smile, and it is through those happy memories that her spirit continues to live on and be with those who knew and loved her. As her father Joe said, "My family and I, we talk about her and we have photos of her all around the house. She's in our hearts and minds all the time." The Alice Gross case. Alice Gross was born on Valentine's Day, February 14th, in the year 2000 in London. She was raised in a loving family and had an older sister. Alice demonstrated a passion for creativity from a very young age, enjoying drawing, playing the piano and the violin. She also had an interest in fashion design, and at the age of 11, she even made a dress for her school graduation. At 14 years old, Alice was diagnosed with anorexia and depression. Despite these challenges, she continued to engage in creative activities and showed great potential for future success. On August 28, 34, during the school holidays, Alice told her mother she was going for a walk. She enjoyed strolling along the small water canal and river near her home in Hanwell, a suburb of London. Her usual walk was about 4.5 kilometers long. She left around 3 p.m., promising to return by 6 p.m. Later, she texted her father, saying she would be home soon. Alice did not return at the expected time, and by 7 p.m., with her phone turned off, her parents became anxious. Given her battle with anorexia and depression, they feared something had happened to her, particularly because her physical condition could lead to weakness or fainting. Her parents contacted her friends in hopes that she might be with them, but no one had seen her that day. They then decided to call the police. The search began immediately, focusing on Alice's usual route. Friends and relatives joined the police in their efforts. Although no trace of Alice was initially found, detectives managed to gather several eyewitness accounts that helped them establish a more accurate route for the search and identify specific surveillance cameras that might have captured her. Reviewing the footage, detectives saw Alice shortly after she left home, heading towards the Grand Union Canal and later near the Brentford area along the canal. The last camera captured her returning close to her home, near Trumpers Way Bridge. The media were alerted about the missing teenager, and her case was quickly broadcast throughout London. Thanks to this coverage, detectives received multiple calls from people who reported seeing Alice. Unfortunately, none of these efforts brought the police any closer to finding the girl. According to the security camera footage and witness statements, Alice had disappeared on her way home, having completed most of her usual route. But what happened to her remained a mystery. 3 days passed. The police continued to scrutinize the camera footage from nearby areas and also inspected local parks and other secluded areas. Meanwhile, patrol officers canvassed the homes along Alice's route and questioned local residents. On September 1st, Alice's family recorded a video message pleading for her to return home. They also asked anyone with information about her whereabouts to contact the police. Investigators were considering several theories at the time. The most disturbing was the possibility of an abduction. Even though Alice's route was mostly through city streets, there were many remote and hidden areas where she could have been attacked. Kidnappings were not unheard of in London, even less so in the suburbs. Another theory was that Alice had run away from home. Her parents feared that her depression might have led her to make such a decision. They also did not rule out the possibility that she might have taken her own life due to her illness. However, the police found these theories to be unlikely. At 14, it seemed improbable that Alice could have run away and hidden herself without help, and if she had taken her own life, her body would likely have been found. The case was drawing increasing public attention and was handed over to the Special Unit of Scotland Yard on September 3rd. Although they typically worked on murder cases, the detectives considered the possibility of the girl returning home to be high. Scotland Yard organized a massive search which was immediately joined by hundreds of volunteers. After seeing the heart-wrenching appeal from her parents and sister on the news, concerned Londoners calmed the area from dawn till dusk. The next day, detectives announced the discovery of the first solid piece of evidence. They had found Alice's backpack, which contained the shoes she had been wearing that day. It was found relatively close to her home. This discovery allowed the police to narrow their search, focusing on a small area near the canal. Investigators realized it was unlikely that Alice would have removed her own shoes, thrown them with her backpack, and run away. She did not have a spare pair of shoes with her, which complicated the situation even more. Scotland Yard decided to release all available security camera footage of Alice. The backpack and shoes indicated that the girl might be in serious danger. The main theory continued to be that of abduction, but investigators had not completely ruled out the possibility of suicide. Therefore, they attempted to use all available resources to locate her. The release of the footage could attract more public attention, and someone might remember seeing Alice that day. Along with this, several 100 more people from various agencies joined the search, and there were now 600 people working on the case. The investigation thus became the largest in terms of police involvement since the year 2005. Some of them were inspecting the area directly, while others reviewed footage from the hundreds of cameras that Alice might have been captured on. Scotland Yard offered a reward of £20,000 for any information that could help find Alice Gross, although they were unable to locate her phone. They did, however, provide the mobile phone company with details of her last known location. It turns out Alice had sent a message to her father from nearly the same place where her backpack would later be found. This suggested that investigators should focus their efforts in that specific area. Therefore, a thorough search of a several square kilometer area was decided upon, with every meter of land and water being manually examined. Police teams meticulously scoured the river and canal for any evidence. 2 days after her backpack was discovered, it was reported that police had detained a 25-year-old man on suspicion of Alice's murder. The following day, another man was arrested, but details were not disclosed until the investigation was clearer. However, both suspects were released soon after, as Scotland Yard could not establish their involvement in Alice's disappearance. More than a week passed with no progress in the case. It wasn't until September 16th that police issued another statement. They were seeking a 40-year-old man named Arnis Alkons in connection with Alice's disappearance. He had moved to England from Latvia 7 years prior and lived in the area as a construction worker. Scotland Yard's interest in him was piqued for 2 reasons that at first glance seemed unrelated. Firstly, Zalkons' co-workers reported him missing to the police on September 3rd. He had not shown up for work, was not answering his phone, and was not at home. It appeared he had simply vanished. Secondly, detectives discovered that Zalkons' route from his home to work roughly followed the same path Alice had taken on the day she disappeared. The detectives soon uncovered something truly disturbing. Security camera footage showed a middle-aged man on a bicycle crossing the bridge Alice had crossed just minutes before. This man was identified as Zalkons. The travel time between these cameras should have taken only minutes, yet it took the man nearly an hour to pass the stretch, raising questions about what he was doing during that time. It was determined that he could not have taken a longer route to the next camera. He simply wasn't there. Moreover, it was concluded that the man's clothes were wet when he re-emerged onto the road. The cameras later recorded him returning to the same area 2 hours later and leaving again 50 minutes after that without being caught by the camera at the bridge, indicating he had spent all this time within a small blind spot and had changed clothes. About an hour later, Zalkons was recorded in a local shop buying beer. The next morning, he returned to the same blind spot between the cameras around 7 a.m. and again in the afternoon. This was enough evidence to obtain a search warrant for his house where he lived with his girlfriend and 2 daughters. His roommate had no idea where Zalkons had gone. Upon learning he was a suspect in the girl's murder, The roommate said Zalcombs could never have done such a thing, describing him as a caring and attentive father. However, Scotland Yard investigated Zalcombs' background and uncovered a truly sinister past. In 1998, while in Latvia, Zalcombs had coldly and calculatedly murdered his wife, burying her in a pre-dug grave in the forest, for which he only served 7 years in prison. After serving his sentence, he moved to England, and the local authorities were not even aware of his criminal past in his home country. Police searching Zalcombs' house found a freshly dug plot on his property. They did not reveal if they found any evidence there, but they did make a significant discovery in the basement: a broken back panel of a white iPhone 4S, the same model Alice had possessed. A search of his computer revealed that he had searched for information about Alice Gross's disappearance days after the incident. Consequently, Zalcombs was added to the wanted list. Fearing he may have fled to Latvia or another European country, Scotland Yard issued a search across the European Union. However, they could not find a single trace of the suspect. A month had passed since Alice's disappearance, and on September 30th, the police made a grim announcement. A human body was found in a river near the area of the girl's disappearance. The body was not immediately identified, but the police shared a chilling detail. Someone had gone to great lengths to keep the body submerged and hidden from the surface. The next day, the police confirmed that the deceased was Alice Gross. There was no longer any doubt. The exact location where the body was found was where she had disappeared, and the cause of death was strangulation. Alice's body had been wrapped in construction bags, tied to a large tree stump. Furthermore, a structure had been built using a bicycle wheel and bricks to keep the body submerged. She was found wearing only a sock. Detectives visited the workplace of Arne Zalcombs and discovered that the same type of bags used to conceal Alice Gross's body had also been used at the construction site where he worked. Following the discovery of the body, the police continued their search for Zalcombs, working closely with Interpol and local European intelligence agencies. However, no trace of him was found. This continued until October 4th, when investigators made an unexpected discovery. They found a man's body hanging in a park, just a kilometer from where Alice had been murdered. 2 days later, it was confirmed that the deceased was Arne Zalcombs. This development was unforeseen. The prevailing theory of Scotland Yard was that the suspect had fled to Europe, but it turned out he had been in the vicinity the entire time. Medical experts concluded that the man had taken his own life on the day of his disappearance, September 3rd, and he was not found for a month. There was nothing surprising in the discovery location. Zalcombs had chosen a very remote and inaccessible spot, making it exceedingly difficult to locate him. With Zalcombs' DNA in hand, investigators had even more evidence. Close to where Alice's body was found, the police discovered a cigarette butt, which was sent to the laboratory. The DNA extracted from the filter matched Zalcombs' sample. Moreover, the laboratory stated that it was very likely that the perpetrator's DNA would be found on the victim's body, although they could not state this with absolute certainty due to the time the body had been underwater. His DNA was also found on the girl's backpack and shoes. By that time, the police had uncovered another horrifying fact. It turned out that 2 years after moving to England, Zalcombs had abused a 14-year-old girl about a kilometer from where Alice's body was found. The man attempted some kind of indecent act, but the victim survived and the man was arrested. This is where things get complicated. The girl did not press formal charges and the assailant was simply released. It's not entirely clear how this could have happened, but the fact remains that an adult man who had abused a girl fell into the hands of the police and was freed from punishment. Moreover, information about the case came to light after the discovery of the perpetrator's body in the park. Nevertheless, the police continued their investigation and took some time to reconstruct what had happened. According to their findings, on that unfortunate day of August 28th, Zalcombs was cycling along the same route that Alice was walking. He found her in a secluded area hidden from public view and attacked her with the intention of committing depraved acts. We will never know exactly how events unfolded from there, but the outcome was tragic. He killed Alice and then hid her body in various locations, always returning to the scene of the crime. We will also never understand why he decided to take his own life after what he had done. It is very debatable whether this can be called a manifestation of conscience. Alice's parents, who have endured such a terrible tragedy, felt outraged by the government's handling of the situation. They questioned how the British authorities had allowed a convicted murderer to enter the country and stay here. For years, they have been fighting for the government to tighten immigration controls to keep criminals at bay. Unfortunately, to this day, they have not managed to make a significant difference. A month after Alice's body was discovered, another noteworthy incident occurred. The coroner responsible for the investigation had left a folder with case documents on a train. 30 pages contained important information about the murder, including medical information and undisclosed details. The public, the media, and Alice's parents harshly criticized the police. However, they could do nothing about it as the file could not be found. Nevertheless, the deceased suspect was not judged by anyone. Investigators said that if he had been alive, they would have had enough evidence to take the case to court. But there was no guarantee of a conviction. The problem was that all the evidence available against Zalkins was circumstantial, and there was little chance of securing a conviction. However, an inquest was held in court where the jury acknowledged an already evident fact. Alice had been murdered. Her death was not an accident. The procedure was formal and did not play a significant role. Alice's funeral took place on October 23rd. 1,000 people attended her memorial. And at the end of the ceremony, a beautiful song that the girl had written and sung herself was projected on a large screen. Let's travel back to Tulsa, Oklahoma, on October 22, 1984, when the city was left baffled as 18-year-old Annette Craver disappeared without a trace. The police searched the area in an effort to find the truth, but they were unsuccessful, and the teenage married girl's whereabouts remained a sinister mystery. Despite the fact that her disappearance remains a mystery, the police were concerned that it might actually have been a horrifying homicide. It turned out that this situation was much more complicated than it seemed. In the long run for justice, a man was found at the center of it all, and for an incredible 54 years, his perverted viewpoint would prevail over the pursuit of justice before justice finally prevailed. What might have happened to Annette? A young, beautiful teenage girl. Why did it take so long to solve the mystery of this chilling case? Who was this maniac that took her away? Hello and welcome back to Mystery Detective, where we explore dark and sinister stories around the world. Stay with us as we walk you through this 54 years mystery and 2 other eerie mysteries that are closely related to this terrifying case. Tulsa, a city in Oklahoma, is captivating with a distinctive fusion of tradition and modernity. This city, which is tucked away in the middle of America, offers a vibrant way of life that is enriched by its varied cultural scene. Tulsa is renowned for its exquisite architecture, well-preserved art installations, vibrant performing arts community, and succulent barbecue restaurants. The city is also well known for its long history of oil production and for being the birthplace of the famous Route 66. Tulsa has battled crime despite its accomplishments. The city's violent crime rate exceeded the national average in 2020, making it one of the most dangerous cities in the country. Further emphasizing the negative aspects of the city, Tulsa also saw the mysterious disappearance of Annette Craver. Annette Michelle Craver was born on December 7, 1965, in Houston, Texas, but little is known about her early life. In 1979, when her father tragically died in a car accident, things took a significant turn. The heartbreaking incident had a negative impact on Annette's emotional health. Annette's mother, Mary Rose, observed a noticeable shift in her daughter's behavior, noting that she became more reclusive and frequently turned to solitude for comfort. Annette was by herself a lot of the time. She was constantly creating art and writing poetry. She would also occasionally pick up a guitar. Mary was aware, deep down, that her cherished daughter had been experiencing great hardships as a result of her father's passing. A significant event took place on September 8, 1981, when Mary organized a yard sale in Houston to sell her late husband's possessions. 15-year-old Annette actively helped her mother sell off her father's possessions. Despite her lack of expression, it was clear that Annette had not yet recovered from the devastating loss of her father. Mary worried about Annette's isolation and loneliness, but she was unaware that Annette wasn't actually feeling lonely. Unknown to Mary, Annette had been involved with a charming man who had a sizable age difference. In addition to being older than Annette, the man was even older than Annette's mother. Mary's first encounter with Annette's friend, 40-year-old Felix Vale, occurred at the yard sale. Mary didn't suspect anything and never entertained the thought that there might be more going on. As Felix approached Annette to talk, Mary noticed the obvious age gap. Mary struggled with the burden of financial difficulties following the death of her husband. After finding it difficult to find employment in Houston, she considered moving away in search of work and better opportunities to give her daughter a better life. Mary overcame a number of obstacles and was rewarded for her perseverance when she received a job offer in Oklahoma. But there was still a lot to worry about. Annette, who had already missed 2 academic years, was about to receive her high school diploma. Mary was aware that her daughter's academic progress might be jeopardized by a sudden move to another state. When faced with this decision, Mary went with her plan of action. She asked a friend for help in taking care of Annette, while she relocated to Oklahoma in search of employment. Although the plan seemed good at first, it soon started to fall apart for Mary. As time went on, a growing worry became apparent. The bond between Annette and Felix appeared to have grown stronger while she was away. As she watched the 40-year-old man become more involved in her daughter's life, Mary couldn't help but feel uneasy. This was a circumstance that greatly disturbed her. After Annette graduated from high school, Mary was able to buy a new home thanks to her diligent saving. She registered the house under both of their names with the hope of reuniting their lives and living together once again. Mary's thoughts of a long-awaited reunion were dashed after she learned that Annette had left when she got back to Houston. Mary discovered that after Annette graduated high school, Felix immediately suggested a road trip to her. Captivated by his charm, she happily accepted his offer. Over the course of 1983, Mary did occasionally get letters from Annette, each coming from a different place. Then one day, a call from her daughter, who was at the time living in California, arrived. Hearing from Annette gave Mary a rush of happiness, but the conversation quickly became concerning. Annette, who was only 17 years old at the time, asked her mother for permission before she married Felix Vale. Annette seemed to have already made up her mind, despite Mary telling her daughter it would be a mistake to marry Felix, advising her to wait until she was at least 18 years old. Annette allegedly declared her love for Felix Vale and intended to wed him in Mexico. Mary struggled with a difficult decision, knowing that she might lose her daughter who was very involved with Felix. She was aware that refusing a daughter she hadn't seen in a while could have its own effects. She consequently gave the marriage her approval with a heavy heart, believing her daughter to have good judgment and not realizing Felix was a bad man. But the perfect married life Annette had pictured would soon start to fall apart. Annette opened up to her mother in letters written shortly after their wedding. She revealed that Felix had changed unsettlingly, becoming more and more domineering. She shockingly revealed that Felix had even forced her to have an unauthorized abortion after learning she was pregnant with his child. Mary begged Annette to come home right away, consumed with worry for her daughter's safety. Annette eventually mustered the strength to escape Felix's grip in 1984 and made her way back to her mother. However, when Mary finally caught a glimpse of her daughter, she couldn't help but notice that she had changed. Annette had lost her identity. She was constantly perplexed by everything. Mary believed that her daughter was simply overwhelmed by Felix's attempts to manipulate and control her life. Mary found comfort in being reunited with her daughter amidst the changes. But this joy was short-lived. They were unhappy not long after Annette returned. Felix began tormenting their home with relentless phone calls and his insistence on speaking to Annette. Mary was unmoved and maintained her position, determined to defend her daughter at all costs. However, things got worse in October 1984, when Felix was able to breach Mary's house's perimeter, boldly entering without permission and making his way up to Annette's room. The two spent some time talking privately in Annette's room. When they eventually came out to Mary, they would say something that would break her heart. Mary was sternly instructed to leave the house by them. Mary tried to patch things up with Annette, despite her heartbreak, but her efforts were in vain. Annette remained controlled under Felix's sway, and was unresponsive to any opposing viewpoint. Mary gave up her share of the home as a result, packed her belongings, and moved to California with a heavy heart. The nightmare did not end there though. When Annette turned 18 years old, she made a big decision by claiming the inheritance her late father had left for her. Surprisingly, she allegedly transferred all the money into Felix's account and gave him legal ownership to her home. Mary attempted to contact her daughter after learning of this worrying development, but for some reason she was unable to reach her. She then wasted no time and contacted Felix right away. Felix asserted that Annette had requested going to Mexico on her own and that he had put her on a bus. On October 22, 1984, Mary immediately called the police and reported her daughter missing. Following receipt of the missing person report, the Tulsa police moved quickly to speak with Felix Vale in an effort to gather any information they could. Unfortunately, the police were also manipulated by Felix, just like Annette. Mary had a strong hunch that Felix was concealing the truth and had a significant role in Annette's disappearance. Despite her convictions, the police were persuaded by Felix's remarks and gave up looking for Annette Craver. Felix was successful in persuading the authorities that Annette had left alone on her own volition. Mary was left feeling helpless and clinging to the steadfast hope that her daughter would one day return after being repeatedly ignored by law enforcement regarding her daughter's disappearance. She sat by the phone for years, hoping Annette would call to say hi on special occasions like her birthday and Mother's Day, but sadly nothing ever happened. By 1991, a startling 7 years had passed without a significant development in the search for Annette Craver. Mary wrote hundreds of letters in an effort to contact the police, but neither they nor the FBI were interested in getting back to her. Even Felix didn't respond to the letter she sent him. Mary had the sobering insight that depending on others would be fruitless. She made the decision to conduct an independent investigation. Due to her tenacity, Mary initially tried to learn more about Felix using the developing internet's resources, because she was convinced he held the key to Annette's disappearance. However, there wasn't a lot of online information available in the 1990s. Mary's unwavering diligence allowed her to track down a single but crucial lead, which was Sue Jordan, Felix's sister. Mary traveled halfway across the country to meet her, spurred on by hope and the potential for learning crucial information. Mary was informed by Sue Jordan that Felix had a wife who had drowned. With the help of this promising information, Mary was able to locate Mary Horton Vale's family in Louisiana in 1993. Mary Horton Vale was Felix's first wife. Her efforts paid off when she was able to track down Mary Horton's brother, Will Horton, who had only been 15 when his sister tragically drowned in the Calcasieu River. Will Horton described his sister with a warm heart during Mary's encounter with him. He said, "My sister was so very special, so thoughtful and kind." He spoke of her with fondness. Felix Vale, his brother-in-law, was not accorded the same sentiment, though. Will Horton revealed that his family had a clear grudge against Felix. Mary Elizabeth Horton Vale's ancestry can be found in Louisiana, where she was born on February 16, 1940. She assumed the position of editor for the school newspaper. She was also named the Eunice High School Homecoming Queen. When she was attending McNeese State College in 1960, to further her education, her path crossed with Felix's. Amazingly, the two exchanged wedding vows just 6 months after they first met. In 1961, their union produced a Bill Vale, their son, was welcomed into the world by Mary. Felix, however, acted otherwise. With the birth of their child, Felix's attitude changed noticeably. He began to treat his first wife with a controlling attitude, much like he did with Annette later. He even threatened her, telling her what would happen if she got pregnant again. Mary Elizabeth Horton Vale became pregnant once more the following year, despite Felix's warning. Felix was enraged by the news, driving her to seek safety from his fury. She and her son Bill fled to her mother's house out of fear of his wrath. Mary Horton considered divorcing Felix, but her mother advised her to go back and try to make amends with him. Mary's life tragically ended before they could settle anything. On October 28, 1962, Mary Horton and Felix Vale went fishing along the Calcasieu River. In an unfortunate turn of events, Mary drowned to death. Felix described what happened when he was questioned by the police. According to him, Mary allegedly drowned after she unintentionally fell off the boat. The Horton family remained dubious of this account and found it difficult to believe. Felix quickly rose as a top suspect in the investigation. As a result of the murky circumstances surrounding Mary's drowning, she was found dead in a place that was unsuitable for fishing. After being found 2 days later, her body underwent an autopsy, which turned up red flags. Mary had bruises on her neck, right calf and left leg, which suggested that she may have fought before being forced into the water. Authorities discovered a scarf that had been wrapped around her neck and put in her mouth, suggesting traumatic asphyxia, a type of suffocation. This discovery provided additional damning evidence. The detectives were confident Felix was the murderer in light of the mounting evidence, but the coroner had a completely different take. He thought the evidence was insufficient to convict Felix. Felix also vehemently denied being guilty. He was released in January 1963 after a Calcasieu Parish grand jury declined to indict him. At the time, Mary Horton's family was devastated and felt cheated by Felix's release. Mary Rose, Annette's mother, was more enraged by what she had heard as Will Horton broke down, relaying this tragic information. Will described how the loss of his sister devastated their mother and left a void in his heart that would never be filled. At that point, Mary Rose's pursuit of justice included a steadfast search for justice on behalf of Will's sister, Mary Horton, in addition to her daughter. Though before the two women could receive justice and the police could be fully involved, Mary Rose understood the need for more concrete evidence than just statements. Thankfully, she was no longer fighting for justice by herself. Will Horton tells Mary that since 1975, he has been getting calls from people asking about a girl who vanished in Sulphur in 1973. The fact that the girl in question was Sharon Hensley, Felix's ex-girlfriend after Mary Horton, added to the unsettling nature of the situation. Sharon Hensley's mother called for years to inquire as to whether Sharon had been seen. Mary Rose began a new journey in her search for knowledge. She soon understood that her daughter was not Felix's only victim. In 1994, she made her way to Bismarck, North Dakota to meet with Sharon Hensley's brother, Brian. Brian characterized his sister as independent. In the summer of 1970, Sharon Hensley, who was born on December 20, 1948, left her home in Bismarck, North Dakota. She aimed to welcome a new beginning in her life as she joined other free-spirited people who are forging their journey in the wake of the renowned Summer of Love. Sharon Hensley's ultimate destination was San Francisco. She was able to accomplish her objective, but the reality that met her was a far cry from the idyllic life she had imagined in her North Dakota sanctuary. Her path instead took her to Felix Vale. Felix, at that time, adopted an unconventional lifestyle and embraced a nomadic existence after the death of his first wife. During this stage, he even assumed the persona of a traveling preacher and founded his own personal cult group called the Holy Order of Mans. During this time, Sharon Hensley, then age 21, met Felix. In 1972, 2 years after leaving, Sharon visited her parents' house in Bismarck with her new boyfriend, Felix Vale. But their daughter had undergone a change. The once vivacious North Dakotan girl who loved to dance and hang out with her friends now seemed distant. Her parents were worried that her independence was being supplanted by the influence of her new boyfriend. Her parents were uncomfortable after the meeting, but Sharon, who was an adult, decided to leave with Felix. She had the freedom to choose her own course of action. Nevertheless, her parents' concerns grew more serious. They believed Felix was exposing their daughter to a dangerous lifestyle, one characterized by drug use and irresponsible conduct. But not even they could have predicted what lay in store for the future. In a short period of time, Sharon joined Felix's cult group and interacted with them. Her involvement, though, came at the same time as the dramatic change in their relationship. At the time, Felix's drug use increased and his behavior changed, becoming more violent and domineering. During those times, Sharon's family thought she was with him out of fear. She had no idea how to escape the predicament. Along with Felix, Sharon was about to travel to South America. But before beginning this journey, she called her mother one last time to say goodbye. Her mother sensed something was wrong, though she couldn't quite put her finger on what it was. Her maternal instincts were spot on, because after that final communication, Sharon stopped calling or writing. She disappeared with no trace. In a letter to Sharon's family in 1973, Felix claimed that he had last seen Sharon in Key West. His story was that she had left him and gone sailing around the world with an Australian couple. The Hensley family, however, had skepticism about everything Felix said, as was a common theme in all of these cases. In February 1973, Sharon's family reported her missing. But regrettably, the police did nothing for a full year. A dated newspaper report filled the gap even though there were immediate investigations or initial police support. The story from the old newspaper caught Brian Hensley's attention. The news report from 1970 mentioned Sharon and Felix's arrest. According to the report, a young boy of about 8 years old showed up at the police station and asked for help to go back home. Bill Vale, the son of Mary Horton and Felix Vale, was revealed to be the child. Bill, an 8-year-old boy, went to the police station without shoes or socks and complained that his father was forcing him to smoke marijuana and that he wanted to return home. The Horton family was unaware that Felix had taken Bill with him when he left for California following Mary Horton's passing. Bill was compelled to follow his troubled father wherever he went from that point on. Additionally, the police discovered that Bill had a history of violence. The police also discovered that Bill had experienced abuse during this time before escaping and making his way to the police station. Felix and Sharon were detained for endangering a child. However, it is unknown how the two managed to escape the police custody. When Mary Rose heard about all of these things from Sharon's brother, she made the decision to meet Bill Vale. She thought Bill might be a source of vital information because he had valuable knowledge about where Felix was. With this goal in mind, Mary set out for Kansas to meet with Bill and his family. Mary Rose said Bill was very honest. He treated her with a lot of kindness and sympathy. Mary observed that despite being a good man, he was terrified of his father. Bill was initially apprehensive to share much information, for fear that doing so might unintentionally bring Felix closer to his own wife and kids. But his desire to help Mary and obtain justice for his mother won. Bill made the decision to seize this opportunity after realizing its importance. He gathered the courage to divulge the dark secrets that might support Mary's claims. Bill described an important event that happened in 1970, just before he fled and arrived at the police station. He had unintentionally overheard his father, Felix, and Sharon talking to each other. Bill claimed that Felix admitted to Sharon that he had killed Mary Horton, his mother. Bill sought refuge with his grandparents after Sharon and Felix were detained in 1970, which resulted in a significant change in his life. Despite this alteration, he continued to be afraid of his father, especially since he was required to testify against him in court throughout the trials. This fear of his father's return increased his anxiety, and tragically Felix did return in 1975. Felix arrived at Bill's grandparents' house and asked to see his son. The fact that Sharon was no longer with Felix added to Bill's fear, which was already strong. When Bill inquired about Sharon, Felix responded that Sharon would never bother anyone again. Bill, who was only 13 years old, understood what he meant, but he had no way to put that knowledge to use. At the time, he was unable to speak to anyone about his father's sinister behavior. Bill struggled with the worry that if he shared these revelations, Felix might hurt his family. His desire for justice was stronger. Sadly, Bill's battle with cancer claimed his life in 2009, preventing him from seeing his mother's justice served. Bill, however, made sure to meticulously document his account of Felix's confession before he passed away. He asked the local preacher to write down his story so that the truth would be preserved for future generations. After a while, Mary Rose felt she had something important enough to ask the FBI to reopen the case. Although she was aware that there was no physical proof, she clung to the belief that the testimony of the Hortons, Sharon's brother, Felix's son, Bill, and herself could possibly give her the evidence she needed to pursue justice for her daughter. Mary had the opportunity to speak with a special FBI agent who dealt with cold cases and serial killers. He accepted Mary's account and determined Felix was a serial killer. Tragically, the cold case department took the brunt of the budget cuts, and the agent who had demonstrated support for Mary's cause was let go. Due to this unfortunate turn of events, Mary's quest for justice had no way to be furthered. She awoke to find herself exactly where she had started. Mary felt guilty for having inspired all the families to pursue justice. The families who trusted her, though, knew she wouldn't give up. Even though the conversation fizzled, Mary kept looking for someone to assess their situation. She simply felt a strong desire to put Felix behind bars. Over the course of nearly 30 years, Mary had been gradually worn down as a result of her resolve to fight for justice. While listening to the radio in June 2011, Mary heard about a detective who had solved 8 murder cases involving the infamous Burning Mississippi murders, which were carried out by the Ku Klux Klan. Before he cracked them, these cases had remained unsolved for 50 years. The knowledge of this gave Mary the additional push she required. Mary immediately set out on a quest to find the investigator's contact information. Fortunately, she was able to find his phone number. Jerry Mitchell, a resident of Mississippi, was this person. Mary informed Jerry Mitchell about the cases and soon learned that Felix Vale had moved to Mississippi. As a result of this realization, Mary was faced with a decision she had to make. Mary Rose and Jerry Mitchell traveled through Mississippi in 2011 in order to reach the crucial spot where the criminal was. They arrived at a remote and desolate trailer park. Jerry wondered if Felix was watching them as they highlighted from their vehicle, but Mary didn't seem to care. She merely wished to put an end to Felix Vale's chapter. They noticed a broken window as they neared the trailer house. Mary crept through the window to enter the room in search of the truth without thinking twice about the danger. Jerry couldn't believe his eyes when she started throwing out machetes a short while later. Mary Rose and Jerry saw someone rushing in their direction as they looked around the house. But it wasn't Felix Vale. Rather was Kay Faulkner, his sister, who appeared to be upset at their sudden intrusion. However, when Kay found out why Mary and Jerry were there, her initial anger at their unforeseen presence quickly subsided. When Kay Faulkner was spoken to, she admitted that she thought her brother had murdered those women. Only one day into the investigation, Jerry Mitchell recognized the quick progress made and seized the opportunity. He started by speaking right away with Mary Rose, the Hensleys, and the Hortons. As a result of these testimonies from the victim's family, In 2015, the book titled Gone was published. This book painstakingly documented the family's experiences. It received numerous awards and a great deal of immediate acclaim. The FBI became aware of this book, and after carefully considering all the relevant information, they decided to reopen the investigation. Mary, who had struggled for a long time, at last felt true happiness. Mary Horton's case was given priority by the FBI after a careful review of all the information that was available, primarily because her death had been officially declared, unlike that of Sharon and Annette, whose bodies had never been found. The problem was that this case had been going on for more than 50 years, which had led to reports and data being lost over time. The FBI persisted in their search for a district attorney who would be willing to take on this challenging old case, and they eventually found the right candidate, Hugh Holland. After reviewing the case, Hugh Holland didn't waste any time in sending out a squad to raid Felix's house. Authorities discovered Felix Vale's nearly 2,500-page journal. They learned from reading the journals that Felix made a conscious effort to dominate every woman in his life, frequently using physical force. Felix wrote about how he even enjoyed drinking raw blood in the journals, but there was nothing pertaining to the killings. Since Mary Horton drowned in the Coquizia River in 1962, Holland and his team decided to find someone who might have any information regarding the incident. Surprisingly, they discovered a man named Ike Absker, who was 90 years old. Felix Vale and Ike Absker shared a room when Felix Vale lived in Lake Charles. Ironically, Ike's father had a lot of boats and was a member of the search team that the sheriff's office hired to look for Mary Horton's body. Ike was on board in his father's boat when Mary's body was found. As they were talking during their meeting, Ike Absker, who was in a wheelchair, handed Hugh Holland an envelope with the word "keep" written on it. When Holland opened the envelope, he took 2 pictures out, and they turned out to be pictures of Mary Horton's body on the day it was discovered, showing severe bruising and wounds. When Holland finally came to the realization, he grabbed the photos and started his examination. Holland was working on the case in his office when a pathologist happened to walk by. "Who murdered her?" the pathologist said as he bowed down to look at the pictures. That was sufficient evidence and confirmation for Holland to declare Mary Horton's case to be a homicide. Now armed with sufficient proof and strong evidence, Holland quickly filed charges against 76-year-old Felix Vale for the murder of his first wife, Mary Horton. In a fitting turn of events, Louisiana, the very location where the case had started, became the location where it finally came to an end. 2014 served as the year of judgment when Felix Vale was captured and taken into custody. The disappearances of Sharon and Annette were also brought up during the trial. After all, Felix Vale was the last person to see them both. Holland asked Ike Absker to testify because he understood how important his testimony was to the case, and that it will be the most important piece of evidence used throughout the entire trial. Ike Absker died at his home on May 17, 2014 from old age, nearly 3 months after giving his testimony. However, during the court proceedings, his testimony proved to be the deciding factor that all doubts were dispelled. The jury only needed about 10 minutes to reach a conclusion. Felix Vale received a life sentence after being found guilty. When Felix was found guilty, Mary Rose, Brian Hensley, and Will Horton, who were among the audience, breathed a sigh of relief. Mary and Brian were relieved that Felix was held accountable for his actions, finally receiving the punishment he deserved. Even though his involvement in Annette's and Sharon's disappearance could not be proved, Brian Hensley was finally able to hold a memorial for his sister after the verdict. It makes no difference to the victim's family whether Felix was found guilty of killing just Mary Horton or all 3 women. What matters is that he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. After Felix was taken into custody, justice was served, and Mary Rose's tenacious pursuit was rewarded. However, the emotional scar on her heart never fully healed, serving as a constant reminder of the agonizing pain she had experienced. Writing letters as if they were meant for Annette to read helped Mary cope with her lingering guilt over abandoning her daughter because of work. And she did so in the hopes that one day she would be able to move past it and eventually forgive herself. Today's story takes us to Springfield, Colorado. Located in Colorado's southeast corner, Springfield is the home to a population of over 1,000 people. Known as a farming and ranching community, this statutory town is the most populated town situated on the county seat of Baca County. But Springfield had no clue that a mystery on its land in 1988 would take the next 34 years to get solved. On June 3, 1988, Baca County Sheriff's Office responded to a call from a Colorado farm. A local farmer reported to the Baca County Sheriff's Office that he had found what he believed to be human remains on his farm, located approximately 20 miles southeast of the town of Springfield, Baca County, Colorado. The open field was passed by truck drivers on a regular basis. When then Sheriff Willard Goff and then Coroner Robert Morrow, along with other deputies, searched the scene, they confirmed the remains as human remains. On the property, they found scattered human remains which were in a degraded skeletal condition. The remains consisted of what was most of the human skeleton. The bones were not all there, and what was there was white and bleached, with part of the spine still connected. The remains were then sent to the coroner's office for an autopsy, while the investigators scanned the area for clues. Unfortunately, they could not find any evidence that could lead them to unmask the victim's identity. People from the Baca County Coroner's Office, as well as the Sheriff's Office, spent several days searching the farm with the assistance of the farm operator. They documented several items found on the property and screened the soil in the area of the search of potential evidence. However, nothing was found to be able to identify the remains or to assist in determining how or why the person had died or how they could have ended up in the farmer's field. The remains were unrecognizable, and authorities tried in vain to come up with any significant information that could lead them to unmask the identity of the individual. Forensic examination concluded the remains belonged to a female victim who was believed to be between the ages of 19 and 24. She stood between 5 feet 2 inches and 5 feet 4 inches and weighed around 130 pounds. Her hair was brown, but her eye color could not be determined due to the remains being in a degraded condition. She was wearing gray corduroy Levi jeans with the leg cuffs hemmed up to 27.5-inch inseam, a beige-colored winter coat with a white synthetic fur collar and 4-inch fur cuffs, and a 34B bra. A single quarter dating to 1986 was found in her pocket. Forensics could not confirm the ancestry of the victim. She bore traits of Hispanic or Latino people, Native American and European people. She had extensive dental work, including 2 silver cast crowns, 1 upper and 1 lower on the left side, which indicated that she might be from Mexico or had lived along the border of Mexico. The internals of her body suggest that she might have never given birth. It was also concluded that she had died approximately 1 to 3 years before her remains were discovered, and the nature of her death was ruled as suspicious, most likely a homicide. As the victims remained unidentified, authorities at the same time were unable to track down any of her relatives to hand down her remains to her family. With the unavailability of a name, the victim was named as the Baca County Jane Doe. In 2005, Jane Doe, along with copies of case information, was buried in the Springfield Cemetery, while all the original records of her death were kept at the Sheriff's and Coroner's Office. Despite not having any significant evidence about the death of the Baca County Jane Doe, authorities did not give up in their attempts to solve the case. Over the years, multiple attempts were made to identify her. Dental impressions were made and dental records of the victim were submitted to the National Crime Information Center to try to obtain a match within the missing persons database. DNA samples were also taken and submitted for analysis, even though DNA was in its infancy at the time when it came to identifying victims. An anthropological study was conducted on the remains to gather information about any possible evidence on the body that could lead to its identification. Investigators also developed a facial reconstruction to get an idea of what the person might have looked like. Even the filings in her teeth were analyzed in an attempt to determine the previous location of the deceased before her death. Many possible matches, including potential dental matches, were received. But as the investigation progressed, each potential match was ruled out after comparison with the remains. Investigators also held press conferences sharing details about this case and urging the public to come forward with any knowledge they might have about the victim. But nothing was drawn from that, and no one came forward. Despite the diligent efforts of the investigators, the deceased remained unidentified and the case turned cold. After remaining unsolved for over 3 decades, finally in 2021, the case got unexpected assistance and was sent in a new direction. In May 2021, the Baca County Sheriff's and Coroner's Office were contacted by an investigative intern working for the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. The person asked for permission to submit the data from the 1988 Baca County Jane Doe case and to name us, a national database of missing and unidentified persons, as well as a resource center for families to find their missing relatives, which was launched in 2007. It did not bring an immediate result, but the case got renewed attention, which also brought up other resources. Combining their resources with the Baca County Coroner's Office, Baca County Sheriff Aaron Shiplett hoped to get a breakthrough in the case of this Jane Doe. Multiple people from the sheriff's office and coroner's office spent time combining the relevant case information from both agencies' case files into the sheriff's office database using the original documents, which were almost 34 years old. After uploading all the information, several detectives were appointed to analyze it. On the other hand, Shiplett was also trying to contact a genetic genealogy lab, as he was hopeful that advances in technology could potentially identify Jane Doe. In July 2021, the Baca County Coroner's Office made contact with Solved by DNA, which is a Castle Rock-based genetic genealogy company, in an attempt to identify the Baca County Jane Doe. This company possesses expertise in investigative genetic genealogy and advanced DNA testing of crime scene DNA or DNA from unidentified human remains. After developing a DNA profile from the unidentified DNA, they used traditional genealogical research to predict whether a suspect or an unidentified person may fit into a family tree based on numerous DNA databases. However, an obstruction was already on its way to solving the case. Although Jane Doe had her DNA records in the original files of investigations, due to the limitations in technology available at the time, those records were not adequate to do a familial DNA study, and new DNA samples were needed to conduct the investigation. On December 13, 2021, an investigative team of the Baca County Sheriff's Office led by Shiplett exhumed the remains of Jane Doe from the Springfield Cemetery and obtained new samples of familial DNA testing and research before reburying remains. The samples were then delivered to the Colorado Bureau of Investigation in Pueblo for analysis. Learned about a possible familial DNA match. Solved by DNA notified the sheriff's office that they had been able to locate a person through their DNA research that could be a possible family member of Jane Doe. The Baca County Sheriff's Office soon began their process of tracking down and contacting several other possible family members of the match, and was able to get them in touch with Solved by DNA. Solved by DNA then requested them to submit their own DNA for analysis, which was necessary to determine if the Baca County Jane Doe was related to them. As family members agreed, Solved by DNA initiated the process of obtaining their DNA for the necessary research. A month later, on September 26, 2022, the Baca County Sheriff's Office was notified by NAMAS regarding their discovery of a separate familial DNA match for Jane Doe. The match was linked to a person who lived in Texas and had submitted their DNA to the McAllen Police Department in Texas in 2004 in an attempt to search for missing mother, Nora Alia Castillo. Nora's daughter, Josie Castillo, was the one who submitted her DNA to the McAllen Police Department in the process of locating her missing mother. The missing person report of Nora Castillo was filed in 1996, even though she had been missing since 1986 or 1987. According to the report of the McAllen Police Department, the last contact with Nora Castillo was a collect call from somewhere in Colorado shortly before her disappearance. After further DNA testing and analysis, the identity of Baca County Jane Doe was finally confirmed as Nora Castillo. Josie Castillo could not spend much time with her mom while growing up since she lived with her dad. Despite that, she remembered her being an outgoing person who loved to laugh and smile. But Josie also remembered how social services got involved when she was 6 and her sister Crystal was 3. At a time when Nora was going through some issues, Nora attempted to get them while they lived in New Mexico with their dad. But getting into some trouble led her to the jail in Hobbs, New Mexico. From there, it said that she went to a mental institution and that was the last time anyone ever saw from her. 4 years after their mother's mysterious disappearance, the daughters wondered about Nora's whereabouts and how she could be found. The Baca County Sheriff's Office stated, almost 36 years. The family of Nora Alia Castillo finally knows where she is. Along with Josie, her sister Crystal was also notified about their mother's final fate. Although their hope of ever getting their mother alive was shattered, they were happy to have a sense of closure after all these years of waiting. All this came out of absolutely nowhere, and it's a lot, Crystal stated. Despite seeking answers regarding what led to her mother's untimely demise, Josie said she can now go to sleep at night knowing where her mom is thanks to genetic genealogy. My heart is healing. There's a healing process now, Josie stated. Nora's family has since been able to visit Nora's last resting place and even the location where she was discovered. However, authorities are still unaware of what happened to lead to Castillo's death. The details of how Nora Alia Castillo died or why she was in Colorado are still under investigation. For now, this case is still being investigated as a potential homicide. Baca County Deputy Coroner Everett Brissendine said, "We're hoping we would get some kind of tip that would lead us to knowing more about why and how she died." After 3 decades of remaining as a Jane Doe, Nora finally reunited with her family, but even in death she is still deprived of justice. If anyone out there knows anything, do not hesitate to come forward, as your information could be invaluable to unmask the murderer. Do you think Nora's daughters would have ever known the fate of their mother without the miracle of genetic genealogy? The city of Eureka in Humboldt County, California is sometimes referred to as the heart of the U.S. Redwood Coast. However, on the downside, when compared to other locations with comparable populations, Eureka is ranked among the most dangerous cities in the nation. Eureka has a violent crime rate of 38.4, which is higher than the 22.7 national average. The town of Eureka was completely devastated by a horrifying crime that occurred there back in 1997. Slightly north of Eureka, in the deep Ryan Slough, a duck hunter found the severed torso of a woman on October 26, 1997. After notifying the Humboldt County Sheriff Department, an investigation into the matter was started right away. The torso had been stabbed 27 times and was cut down the middle, and the head, arms, legs, and breasts had all been chopped off. The detectives tried numerous times to identify the victim, but were never successful. Nevertheless, they estimated that the woman was between 18 and 25 years old, did not smoke, and had previously given birth. For a little while, this reduced the number on their list, but there was no luck. While the investigation to identify the slain woman continued, a little over 2 months later, in January 1998, an arm of a female body was found and recovered on Clam Beach, which is about 20 miles north of the Ryan Slough. The arm was found to belong to the same woman whose remains were found near Eureka. Her head, another arm, and some of her legs were still missing though. The Humboldt County Sheriff's Department put in a lot of overtime and effort to identify the victim, but it appeared to be an insurmountable task, given the lack of clues and the severely decomposed state of the remains. Months passed with virtually no development in the case. The woman's identity was still unknown, but as 1998 drew to a close, a startling twist in the case caught the investigator off guard and fundamentally changed the direction of the investigation. Wayne Adam Ford, then 36, entered the main Humboldt County Sheriff Department station on Tuesday, November 3, 1998, with the intention of making an odd confession. Rodney Calvin Ford, Wayne's brother, was also present. While the detectives searched him, Wayne was found to be in possession of a woman's severed body part that was sealed in a Ziploc bag. Wayne stopped trying to hide anything, so he willingly cooperated with the officers. Wayne confessed to the detectives that he had committed several crimes and that he had killed 4 women in the North State, including the nameless woman whose body was discovered in the Ryan Slough in October 1997. Rodney informed the detectives that Wayne had called him on November 2, 1998, stating that he needed assistance with something. Wayne claimed he could no longer keep the secrets and that he wanted to turn himself in. Following Wayne's confession, Rodney persuaded him to come clean and turn himself in to the police, while he attempted to piece together what his brother had done. Wayne told the detectives that he turned himself in because, had he not, he might have killed his ex-wife after admitting to killing 4 women. He refrained from acting solely out of a desire to spare his son from suffering. He expressed regret for the harm he had caused to all those women, and revealed that his evil actions were motivated by resentment toward his ex-wife, who was preventing Wayne from seeing their son. Wayne claimed that this infuriated him and caused him to act in heinous ways. Those who knew Wayne said he had been disappointed trying to see his son ever since he and his wife got separated and divorced. Wayne's visitation rights were severely restricted by the terms of his divorce from his ex-wife. On November 3, 1998, was taken into custody without any delay. Dennis Dewis, the sheriff of Humboldt County, spent 3.5 hours interviewing Wayne in an effort to get detailed information about his victims that would aid in their identification. Wayne claimed to have dismembered 3 of his victims and strangled the other one. Wayne listed 4 women who were hitchhikers. Wayne acknowledged that he had attacked each of them before mutilating and strangling them. Wayne reported to the police that on October 17, 1997, he picked up his first victim, whom he thought was a hitchhiker. He continued to describe the horrific events of that day, including how he had attacked her, strangled her, and then severed her body. The possibility that the woman Wayne was referring to could be the one whose remains were discovered in October 1997 occurred to the detectives. However, did not seem to remember the name or face of that woman. During the course of the investigation, detectives searched places where Wayne had lived and discovered more remains that they believed belonged to the unidentified woman. The investigators also discovered that Wayne attempted to cook some of the unidentified woman's remains and stored them in his trailer's freezer nearly a year. The woman's identity remained a mystery despite this information, and numerous body parts were still missing. Tina Renee Gibbs, a Las Vegas prostitute who is 28 years old, is the second victim that Wayne picked up sometime in 1998. Tina's naked body was discovered on June 2, 1998 in the California aqueduct close to the Kern County town of Buttonwillow. Tina was the only known victim of Wayne's that had not had her body severed. She had been strangled to death. In September 1998, for months after he had attacked and killed Tina, Wayne picked his third victim and struck again. This time, he picked up a 25-year-old Fontana prostitute named Lynette Dion White next to an Ontario truck. On September 25, 1998, Lynette's nude body was found floating in a San Joaquin County irrigation canal. The exact cause of Lynette's death was still unknown, but it was thought to be homicidal violence with an unclear ideology. Wayne admitted to the detectives that he had paid Lynette to stay with him for a night the night she passed away. Wayne killed 29-year-old Patricia and Tamez less than a month later. She was his fourth and final victim before he turned himself in. On October 23, 1998, Patricia's naked body was discovered floating in the California aqueduct in San Bernardino County, close to Hesperia. One of her breasts had been chopped off and she had been strangled. When Wayne entered the police station to turn himself in, this was the body part he had been carrying in the Ziploc bag for over a week. Patricia was taken by Wayne from a convenience store and similar to Tina, he paid her to stay the night. Sadly, Patricia also did not make it. Patricia's cause of death was determined to be strangulation with a possible thoracic spine fracture, as well as a broken neck beneath her shoulders. Wayne was being held at the Humboldt County Jail on murder charges with a $1 million bail. The detectives reported that Wayne was contrite and seemed to have come to a realization about his involvement in certain things in life. Wayne's past was investigated further by the authorities to see if he had been involved in any other killings. On December 3, 1961, Wayne Adam Ford was born in Petaluma, California. He was the second child born to an immigrant German mother and an American father. When he was 10 years old, his parents divorced, which had a lasting impact on his life, and led him to enroll in the U.S. Marine Corps after dropping out of high school. Before receiving an honorable discharge in 1985, he served for 6 years. Wayne was struck by an inebriated driver in an accident that occurred in November of 1980. He suffered a head injury in the accident and spent 9 days in a coma. Wayne's family claims that following that incident, his personality underwent a significant transformation. Wayne began to experience psychological problems in 1983, and these problems only got worse over time, necessitating multiple hospital stays. Wayne received a diagnosis of borderline personality disorder not long afterward. Wayne had several run-ins with the law in the years that followed, including accusations that he had beaten and robbed a prostitute in Garden Grove, California, in 1986. He was taken into custody in 1990 on charges of animal abuse, and he spent a little time behind bars in San Clemente, California. Wayne was a bad husband to both of his wives, who eventually filed for divorce. After he had 2 marriages, Wayne worked as a long-haul truck driver and lived in a trailer park in Arcata, California. Between 1997 and 1998, the year of the murders, in a San Bernardino County court on June 27, 2006, Wayne was found guilty on 4 counts of first-degree murder, and he received a death sentence in August of 2006. He is currently incarcerated in San Quentin State Prison in California on death row. Investigators never gave up trying to identify the unidentified female victim of Wayne over the years. In an effort to find leads, they frequently examined missing person reports from the entire West Coast. They even tried using DNA databases to try and identify her. The woman's DNA was added to the National Unidentified Persons DNA Index, as well as the California Missing Persons DNA database. The DNA profile was regularly compared in the combined index system with profiles of other remains and missing persons. Regretfully, there was never a profile match. The woman's identity was still a mystery. William Hansol, the sheriff of Humboldt County, established a cold case unit in 2021 and tasked 2 investigators with the sole responsibility of reviewing and examining their department's unresolved cases in search of fresh leads. In December 2022, the Humboldt County Sheriff Department collaborated with the California Department of Justice and Othram, a forensic genealogy lab, to investigate the possibility of using advanced forensic DNA testing to identify the unidentified woman or a close relative. Courtesy of detectives Othram received a DNA sample from the woman's preserved remains. Forensic genome sequencing was employed by Othram scientists to create a thorough DNA profile of the woman. By using this profile for forensic genealogy, the investigators were able to find a possible DNA match that took them to Kathy Cummings. Investigators speculated that Kathy may be a close relative of the woman who was never identified. The detectives got in touch with Kathy and inquired about any missing family members. According to her statement, Carrie Ann Cummings, her sister, had vanished from the mid-1990s. The detectives asked Kathy about the last time she had any communication with Carrie. Pushing herself to focus more, Kathy remembered the last time she had seen her sister Carrie, which was in 1997. After obtaining a sample of Kathy's DNA, investigators compared it to the sample found on the deceased woman. At last, there was a match. The remains of Carrie Ann Cummings were formally identified in June 2023. Carrie was, as it turned out, only 25 years old when she was killed. Carrie's identity had been unknown for 25 years, but it was no longer a mystery. To provide Carrie's family some closure, the detectives contacted them and told them of Carrie's tragic case. Carrie's sister Kathy informed the detectives that although she was a lovely, intelligent, and humorous woman, she was suffering from an untreated mental illness. Before the family lost contact with her in 1997, she was couch surfing in Eugene, Oregon. Kathy claims that her family attempted to file a missing persons report for Carrie in 1997 when she was reported missing in Oregon and Arizona. But for various reasons, the report was never filed. Carrie's family was informed that she was an adult who had made her own lifestyle choices. There was nothing the police could do if she posed no threat to herself or others. Carrie was never added to any national databases or listed as missing as a result of this. The investigators hoped that this identification would help provide some closure and peace of mind, even though they were aware that they could not ease Carrie's family's suffering. In addition to giving them pride, Carrie's case gave them hope that more cases like hers could be resolved with perseverance. The Humboldt County Coroner's Division is currently working to return Carrie's remains to her family so that a fitting funeral and burial can take place. Wayne Adam Ford is still incarcerated at San Quentin State Prison on death row, while the detectives continue to be committed to reviewing cold cases in collaboration with Othram and the California Department of Justice. On April 29, 2017, Lyon County deputies were called to investigate the discovery of a skull in the 2000 block of Road 145 in Neosho Rapids, Kansas. The skull was found on the west side of the river, near the banks. The person who found it had gone to the river to check the water level after recent rainfall when they noticed the skull. Further investigation led to the discovery of additional remains, including a fitted bedsheet, comforter, and a digital watch, all inside a lawn trash sack. Although the sack was tied at the top, animals had managed to tear into it and access the remains. Lyon County Sheriff's detectives took over the case and conducted an autopsy. The autopsy revealed that the man had scoliosis, a curvature of the spine. It was determined that he was middle to late-aged and approximately 5 to 5 inches tall. The man's death was estimated to have occurred between 2013 and 2016, but the cause of death remained unknown. In August 2017, the details of the case were entered into the National Missing and Unidentified Person System. Despite extensive efforts, including DNA analysis conducted by the FBI laboratory in Quantico, Virginia, the identity of the deceased remained a mystery. Detective Sergeant Travis Mitchell of the Lyon County Sheriff's Office and his team worked tirelessly over the years to identify the Neosho Rapids John Doe. In 2022, Lyon County deputies partnered with Othram, a forensic laboratory, which provided new leads for the investigation. In March 2024, Lyon County detectives contacted a potential relative of the unknown man, leading to the identification of the deceased as Randy Bruce Clayton. Randy was born on October 12, 1953 and was originally from the Phoenix, Arizona area but had been living in Oklahoma. Surprisingly, Randy had never been reported missing. Colby L., Othram's director of operations, emphasized the significance of maintaining hope. He highlighted the accessibility of technology to aid in resolving cases like this one, pointing out that the primary obstacle currently is funding, which is gradually improving. Colby stressed the importance of advocacy for those who are unable to provide financial support. He emphasized the value of advocating for innovative technologies to assist in bringing closure to such cases. The investigation into Randy's case remains ongoing. Anna Marie Mullen was born April 6, 1960 and sadly had a traumatic childhood. She was described as intelligent, loyal, and very generous. In a family of 8 siblings, She took on the role of protector and caretaker for her brothers and sisters. She did her best to make sure that they never went hungry and were taken care of. One of her sisters would later note that Anna Marie was the only reason she was still alive. She and her siblings were eventually put into the foster care system and were separated and sent to live with family members, with Anna Marie going to live with her aunt's family in Ashland, Massachusetts. There she attended Ashland High School and excelled in basketball for 3 years. She enjoyed art, the outdoors, and was always camping and hiking with her family and friends. After high school, Anna Marie joined the Air Force, where she breezed through basic training, but struggled once she had to make the transition to job school. While in job training, after basic training, she was offered the choice to change jobs or be honorably discharged, and she chose the honorable discharge. She then moved to Florida after leaving the Air Force rather than moving back to Massachusetts. She lived in Wilton Manors, Florida for the next 3 years, where she worked as a telephone operator. For a few years, she had problems with alcohol, and her sister believes it was her attempt to forget the traumas of her childhood. She was a regular at the Caboose Bar, now called the Pub, in Wilton Manors, and everyone knew her and she knew everyone. So on November 6, 1982, while at the Caboose Bar, 22-year-old Anna Marie began conversing with a man that was a stranger to the bar. Anna Marie was known for being extremely friendly and outgoing, so it seemed natural for her to take a seat next to the stranger and start a conversation with him. The man was the only person in the bar that night that was not a regular patron. She was likely pleased to find someone so generous, as she had recently lost her job and had only $1 in her pocket that evening. At 2:30 a.m., the unidentified man appeared concerned about her and offered to drive Anna Marie home. She said goodbye to the remaining customers and left with the unidentified man. Just a few hours later, and less than a mile away, members of the St. Clement's Catholic Church began arriving for Mass and found her deceased body on the front steps of the church. She had been sexually and physically assaulted and killed by choking. According to a story in the Florida Sun-Sentinel, 2 employees at the bar agreed to undergo hypnosis to provide police with details of the night, and a sketch of the man was created. Under hypnosis, the employees described the man as Caucasian in his early 30s, about 5 feet 11 inches tall, weighing approximately 200 pounds, with dark brown hair and brown eyes. One of the employees reportedly said that the man's name was Tony, spelled with an I, but was unable to remember a last name. They recalled playing pool with the man and that he had used a unique assembly style he referred to as the New Jersey rack. An envelope that the suspect had laid on the bar had a return address in Northwest Pompano Beach and a name starting with a T. Pompano Beach is about 6 miles from the bar. According to Catch My Killer podcast, a man named Tom that goes by Tommy 2MI messaged her sister Fran Cubes on Facebook in the recent years and said that he was at the bar with Anna Marie the night she was killed. When she called him, he was crying and saying that he would never hurt anyone and he didn't do it. Law enforcement told her sister that they had a lot of DNA samples available to test when technology advanced, but according to her family, the evidence from her has been misplaced, lost, or thrown out by police. According to her sister, years ago, the coroner stated there was a microscope slide with the suspect's biological fluid on it that has never been sent out for testing for unknown reasons. Cold case investigators have been hindered by the fact that valuable evidence was not retained, but there is still a slim chance that the case can be solved if the right person comes forward and speaks to detectives. Also on the podcast, My Killer, Anna Marie's sister describes the frustrations she's had with authorities in trying to get her sister's case investigated. Shockingly, Anna Marie allegedly isn't even listed as an official cold case homicide victim. The Broward County Sheriff's Department is responsible for investigating homicide cases of Wilton Manors, Florida, and as of today, this case remains unsolved.